Good afternoon, everybody, from my condo in Logan Circle, DC. Welcome to this weird asymmetrical or asynchronous, I guess they would say, version of Journalism 320. It's kind of too bad we're not meeting in person today because it's really one of the most important class sessions of the semester. Today is the day where I get into some really deep detail about how you should write your stories because your first in-class writing assignment is coming up this Thursday. Okay? And what I'm also doing is giving you a kind of a big, broad guide for writing news in the multimedia era. And that includes the idea of promoting your stories on social media as well. To begin, let me just note that if you do opt for being a journalist as a career, a daily journalist, you're going to be facing quite some challenges. Every day you're going to have to find the news, you're going to have to pick the format that's best for telling that story. You're going to have to find the language that fits the best to tell that story. And you're going to have to do it all on deadline when someone else might be working on the story that could beat you to the story, or possibly with an editor breathing down your neck to get the story out as soon as possible. And then, once you're done writing, you're going to have to promote the story on social media so people will actually find it. So, as daunting as all of that sounds, let me tell you, I think it's actually quite fun and actually exhilarating. So, with that, let me just tell you a little bit about how to do it. Now, for starters, we need to review something that you should have learned in Journalism 201, and that is the inverted pyramid format. For more than a century now, the inverted pyramid format has been the basic guide for basic news stories. It's what everyone uses. And what is it? If you remember, it's basically an organizational tool by which you structure your stories so that the most important stuff is at the top, and the rest of the story is organized with lesser and lesser and lesser important stuff all the way down to the bottom. Now, there are alternate story forms, and we're going to be talking about them later in the semester. But as you begin, as you're doing hard news stories like the one you'll do in class on Thursday, and the meeting story that you'll do in a couple weeks, that is the formula you will use, the inverted pyramid, with all the news at the top and the lesser stuff further on down. So how do you begin a story in the inverted pyramid format? You begin it with what we call a summary lead. A summary lead includes as many of the 5 W's and the H as is deemed appropriate. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. You don't have to include all of those facts about the story in the lead, but you need to include the most pertinent ones. You can put the others later. All of those factors, who's doing something, what did they do, where did they do it, why did they do it, how did they do it, that needs to be explained in every news story. You can't always cram all of that into a lead, obviously. So do your best and sum up in your first paragraph in a very straightforward way what happened. And let me stress at this point that the worst thing you can do when writing a summary lead is write what we call a say-nothing lead. Here's a say-nothing lead. The College Park City Council met Tuesday, period. What does that tell you? What news does that lead tell you? Nothing. No news in that lead. It's a say-nothing lead. If you're doing a story about the council, you have to have something in the lead about what they did at that particular meeting. Okay? That makes it not a summary lead. So if they pass an important piece of legislation, you write about that. That's generally what will happen at a legislative council meeting like that. Okay? And after you've said, in a nutshell, summing it all up in the first paragraph, your second graph can have a couple of things. It can include the other 5 W's and the H that you didn't put into your lead, or it can be a quote that somehow summarizes what happened at the meeting or what happened in the speech. You can also go, in the second paragraph, go into more detail on what happened in the lead what does it really mean for people? It's kind of an explanatory type section right there after the lead. That's okay too. It all depends on what you have, what your reporting steers you toward. Remember that your reporting is your guide for your writing, and you're structuring your story with the most important stuff first, and if it's an explanation, that's what you go with after the lead. If it's a quote, that's what you go with. All right? And after that, all the way through the story, you're organizing what you're writing in declining order of importance, all the way down to the bottom. And at the bottom, we usually do one thing. We usually either look toward the future. You might say, for example, when and where the next council meeting is, or you find a way to just kind of neatly summarize the entire story in what we call a kicker. Very often a kicker is a really good quote that just sums it all up. All right? It can also be something funny or reflective, anything that just somehow gives the reader something to remember the story by. That's what we're seeking in the ending. Okay? Now, a few details about quotes and attribution. You really have to learn how to use quotes and attribution well to write news stories well. And let me begin by saying this about attribution, and this is hugely important. Anything that is not common knowledge or that you did not see yourself has to be attributed. Okay? What's common knowledge? The Eagles won the Super Bowl. Everybody knows that. You don't have to attribute that. Anything you observe. So, for example, if you were covering a sporting event and you saw the Eagles beat the hated Chiefs, you wouldn't have to attribute that to anyone because you saw it. All right? But most information in hard news stories is going to have to be attributed because people don't know it already. You have to either attribute facts to a person, a document, or an institution. Usually it's going to be a person, especially if it's a meeting story. All right? So keep that in mind. Now, a little bit about quotes. It's best, first of all, to decide what's a good quote and what's a bad quote. Quotes are kind of like the spice that you put on the top of your meal. They're the hot sauce you put on top of your meal to make it more tasty. Quotes are not for delivering basic information. You don't want to quote anyone saying, the council appropriated $200,000 last year for a new garbage truck. That's not interesting. If you have a council member saying, we spent $200,000 on that garbage truck and it can't go a week without going into the repair shop, that's a good quote because that tells you something and it's colorful. But anything that's just basic information, you paraphrase. You don't put in quotes. Okay? Now, how do you attribute quotes? It's best to say who's saying this beforehand, including their title. So you might paraphrase a little of something they said and have comma, said Jerry Zremski, a lecturer at Merrill College. And then the next paragraph would be, we're very happy that this program is continuing, comma, Zremski said, period. It has benefited many students already, close quote. All right, see what I'm doing there? I'm putting the secondary attribution, which is just my last name and the word said, in between the two sentences of the quote. If you have a two-sentence quote, the attribution belongs in the middle, not at the end. It belongs after the first sentence, not after the second. Okay? And on second reference with attribution, we just use a person's last name and we just use the word said. We don't say he noted or he expounded or he explained or he exclaimed. No. We just use the word said. People tend to read over it. It makes your story faster to read because they're used to using the word said. That's why we do that. Okay? Now, let me talk a little bit about writing with style and some do's and don'ts. First of all, try to keep your sentences relatively short, especially your lead. Sentences and leads especially should not be more than 35 words. The longer the sentence, the harder it is to read, the harder it is to understand. We're trying to make our stories as readable as possible, and therefore we tend to use short sentences. Okay? Okay? Use active, compelling verbs whenever you're doing any kind of description. Okay? Try to avoid using forms of the word to be and the verb to have. Those are boring verbs. So you would not say, there was a tornado in Fairfax County Tuesday night. You would say, a tornado tore through Fairfax County on Thursday night. You see the difference? There was is boring. Tore through is not boring. So use active verbs whenever you can. Also, always write in the active voice. What do I mean by that? Say things directly in subject, verb, object structure. Okay? Don't back into things. Here is a way of, an example of backing into things and using the passive voice. The boring lecture was delivered by Zremski. That's not how you would say it. You would say, Zremski delivered the boring lecture. Okay? Simpler, easier to understand, easier to read. How do you find yourself, if you find yourself using passive voice, how do you avoid it? When you're done writing your story, do a search for the word by, B-Y. The word by, nobody's ever told you this before, it's evil. It's no good because it's a sign that you're writing in the passive voice, okay? And don't write in the passive voice. So just remember that. Search your stories for the word by, and if you find yourself writing in the passive voice, like I just explained, rewrite that sentence, okay? Also, when you're writing, don't use cliches. I don't want to see any perfect storms in any of your stories, okay? I don't want to see people throwing their hat into the ring, and I don't want any coach saying he gave it all he had. These are cliches. You've heard them a million times. That means they're not worth repeating in your stories, okay? Be original. Use your own writing. Use your own language, all right? My last little writing tip here is do not use acronyms unless they're really common. You can use NFL. You can use FBI. But you can't use PGCSD for Prince George's County School District. People won't know what it is. Not only that, it's like pouring molasses onto your computer keyboard. It just slows things down. Readers hate acronyms that they do not know. Do not use them. Okay? So just a few little writing tips there. Now, let me talk a little bit about making sure your stories get noticed after you're done writing. We are, these days in journalism, really into search engine optimization. That is, we are really into the idea of making Google find our stories. And how do you do that? It's actually kind of simple and intuitive. So, for example, let's say you're doing a story about the Philadelphia Eagles, right? They just won the Super Bowl. In your headline, would you put Eagles or would you put Philadelphia Eagles? On the web, you'd use Philadelphia Eagles. Why? Because that's what people would be searching for. Maybe the ornithologists out there are searching for the kind of eagles that fly around. But that's not what people are searching for 2 days after the Super Bowl, okay? So use full names. Similarly, with a lot of politicians, if they have common names, like Governor Moore, you might want to say in your headline, Wes Moore, just so that if somebody's out there searching for Roger Moore, they're not going to find your story. They'll find the Wes Moore story if you use Wes Moore in your web headline. Okay? Also, while you shouldn't be using acronyms in your stories very much, common acronyms are really good to use in headlines because, people might search for a story about, the salary cap in the NFL. NFL would work, right? So you would use it, okay? Another little trick, include links in your stories. If you're referring to a previous story you've done, link to it. If you're referring to a document, link to it. The more links that you have in your story, the better it is for search engine optimization. Okay? Couple other little tips for writing web headlines. First of all, headlines are in the present tense. Okay? So it would be, the headline on this lecture would be, Zremski delivers virtual lecture to 320 students. But in the story, you would start it out, Merrill College lecturer Jerry Zremski delivered a lecture. Got it? Past tense always in the stories, present tense in headlines. All right? Headlines absolutely have to be in the active voice, so no use of the word by in headlines. And also, don't use the exact same language in your headline as you use in your lead. If you do that, it's going to seem redundant, repetitive to your readers, and it won't be good. Okay? Now, a little bit about writing social media posts. It's kind of similar. You don't want to repeat the headline. You don't want to repeat your lead. Sometimes what you can do is take a paragraph from further down in your story that kind of sums everything up and use that for your social media post with the link to the story. You can use a quote that sums everything up from the story and again include the link to the story at the end. You should use handles instead of names whenever possible. In social media posts. So if you were doing one referring to this lecture, it would be at Jerry Zremski, which is my handle on Blue Sky and Twitter and Threads. Okay? Use hashtags, but only sparingly and when you know what they're all about. So hashtag Super Bowl this week would work. Hashtag auto show probably wouldn't, because there's no, it's not a big enough deal. It was here a couple weeks ago in DC, but it's not big enough deal to get that much social media traffic, so you wouldn't really want to use a hashtag on that. So that's kind of my basic guide to how you should go here as you're preparing to write your first story on Thursday. I'm just going to mention a few last points. Number one, please look at that PowerPoint that I'm including in this package that includes this video. That PowerPoint will kind of take what I've just said and take it to the next level and help you learn how to structure your stories. Secondly, the real key to becoming a good writer is to be a good reader. We are having you read the post for a reason. You're going to learn a lot through osmosis just by reading good news stories. And don't stop there. Read good histories, read good fiction, learn how the language is used by other writers, and you're going to learn yourself. And also on the syllabus, you'll find 2 recommended books. One is called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. The other is The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. These are both really old books now, but they're absolutely excellent guides to writing well. So especially if you're having some struggles, you might want to check those books out. So anyway, that's all for now. Go take a look at that PowerPoint. We're going to alter the start of Thursday's class a little bit to cover some of the stuff that I can't cover here since I'm not live. We'll be seeing you all on Thursday. And again, I'll be on Zoom at 3 o'clock today in case anybody needs to talk to me. All right? See ya. Bye.